Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Peter, for that great introduction. And thanks to the board and staff of Citizens Union. I actually did intend to speak mostly about the Mets tonight, but I realize that public corruption seems to also be on the agenda. But I have to say, Citizens Union has done so much, and in fact, people who are not involved day to day in reform politics and some of these things that we dig in on in details and talk about Lulus and talk about per diems and things like that. Citizens Union has grown and flourished, and the turnout tonight reflects the hard work of a lot of people on the board and staff over years. So please, thank you for being here, and thanks to everyone who made this possible. And congratulations to my friends, your honorees tonight, Mylan Dinnerstein, a terrific colleague, a great lawyer, Adam Flatto, Stephen Younger, the person who showed up after I got elected Attorney General with the largest pile of resumes I've ever seen in my life. And Hayda, I do think the last time we had a meal together was the day Matt Harvey came back, and I wanted to know how he was doing. Right? So, anything happened since then? Look, this is our inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, people say you'll never reform Albany. If the New York Mets can sweep the Cubs in such a devastating fashion, we can do anything. And I do want to say a special word about Dick Dady, because Dick and I have worked together for quite a few decades on different projects. And I want to just take note of another transformational piece of work that Dick did. Today is the 25th anniversary of the formation of the Empire State Pride Agenda. And with Dick's leadership in those early years, if you want to understand our capability for transformational change, to really change the way people do business, the way they think about things, look at the progress we've made on rights for the LGBT community in 25 years. So, people ask, why are you a reformer? Why are you my father was a member of a political club in Brooklyn back in the 1940s when he came back from World War II. And I thought this was very interesting that I had a card from his club, which was a something or other regular Democratic club. I showed it to the former head of the Brooklyn party, and he looked at it and said, he was a regular. What happened to you? Why are you a reformer? We're reformers because the purpose of the United States is perpetual reform. We didn't start out as a country that was perfect. In fact, if you really want to drill in, the notion that all men are created equal in Thomas Jefferson's beautiful words was far from true. Women weren't even in the sentence, by the way. But slavery was still here. Jews and other non-Christians labored under a whole host of disability laws. It was far from perfect, but the history of America has been the history of reform movements. It has been the history of movements like the abolition movement, the women's suffrage movement, the labor movement and the civil rights movement, the LGBT movement that we've seen rocket ahead with success in the last couple of decades. But it is also the history of political reform movements. And Citizens Union is at the core of political reform in New York and has been at the core of every important reform movement in the history of New York, going back to the end of the 19th century. A small group of prominent New Yorkers, fed up with the corruption at Tammany Hall, formed this new organization, originally as a political party, to fight back against corruption, and the battle was on. And within 4 years, they elected the first reform mayor of New York, Seth Low. And as the New York Times described them, Citizens Union was, quote, a good housekeeper who is unendingly mopping out dark corners, sweeping under sofas, mending and darning and patching, and as every good housekeeper knows, many small chores can add up to a big result. So for over 100 years, those whose footsteps we're walking in have fought for reforms that at the time were considered to be unachievable against corruption that makes today's look like a bunch of petty thieves and small-time artists. The level of corruption faced by Citizens Union in the earlier part of the 20th century was astonishing. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening today, but my favorite Citizens Union story is this remarkable story of what happened when Judge Samuel Seabury investigated Tammany Hall, and this is in the early 1930s, drove Mayor James Walker from office, came out with the most amazing revelations of corruption. But what was important was that Citizens Union and its allies took the public outrage at corruption and turned it into a reform movement. And the City Fusion Movement, as it was called, elected Fiorello LaGuardia as a reform mayor, and then rewrote all of New York City's laws and charter in 1936, transformed the city into a more democratic, more transparent, and more responsive government. So this has been done before. We're not trying to invent anything new. And if you're going to do reform, if you're going to try and undertake transformational change rather than tinkering around at the edges, I would commend to you the work of Citizens Union, because there really is no organization that has a track record like this. The 21st century reform movement, which we need to make our state a more democratic state, small d, a more transparent state, and a more just state, is underway. Now, Peter mentioned and several people have referred to the fact that there are quite a few members of the state legislature who are doing other things than they were doing when they were in the legislature. Well, actually, probably we're doing some of these things now at that time. But the fact of the matter is, we're not in a golden age of corruption. What we're in is a golden age of prosecutorial scrutiny. So I would respectfully submit that things haven't gotten more corrupt. It's just that prosecutors weren't really drilling in on the corruption. There was a sort of a sense that you could turn a blind eye to other public officials, because every prosecutor is either an elected official or appointed by an elected official. And I would suggest that the moment now is very much like the moment in the 1930s, searing revelations of corruption. And it is your job, it is our job, to see that the public doesn't just get disinterested and disgusted, but to see that you channel that outrage into a true reform movement. When I spoke at the Citizens Union meeting in March, I essentially laid out the paths forward. There are only two paths forward in the New York State government. Either there are going to be more investigations, more indictments, further erosion of public confidence, or we're going to see transformational reform that ensures that we are no longer a state, that makes it as hard as possible to vote and as hard as possible to register. In a litigation in North Carolina where they've cut back on early voting, they cited New York for the proposition that you don't really have to have any early voting or any provision to make it easy for people to vote. We are cited as the example of a state that gets away with making it very hard to register and very hard to vote. We can change this, but the way to change it is the Citizens Union way. We take the public outrage, we channel it into a reform movement, and we don't accept the idea that in 2016, with trials overhanging the state legislature of the leaders of both houses, which in fact is a unique event in the history of the state, this is the time to go big. This is the time to think big. This is the time to demand justice. This is the time to demand democracy and demand transparency. So, at the end of the day, and I believe what I said in March is true, and the legislature opted for incremental reforms this year, and people are still getting investigated and people are still getting indicted. This stops, ladies and gentlemen, when we have reforms that actually deter and prevent corruption. In my office, our philosophy is very simple. Catching bad guys is good. Changing systems, changing processes, changing behavior so there are no more bad guys to catch is better. Let us direct the outrage at corruption into true reform. And I do have to say, it's been a pleasure. For decades I've been working on reform. We've had some great victories, and it's important to remember that I referred earlier to the extraordinary success. When I first went into the New York State Senate, there was no civil rights law for the LGBT community in New York. You could fire someone for being gay. You could evict someone for being gay. It wasn't until 2002 that we passed the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act. We have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams there. In spite of overwhelming opposition, we succeeded in repealing the draconian Rockefeller drug laws, and we are well on our way to becoming more of a model of a just criminal justice system, and more steps taken this week. And I have to give my client a shout out for the governor for his work on making it easier for clemency and easier for these petitions to move forward. We are making moves in many areas in the criminal justice system. We had tremendous success. We have also seen reforms, and we've achieved reforms in government, but we are really at a moment, I believe, when the public outrage, and I travel around the state and talk to people all the time, and they are ready for change. They are demanding change. It is Citizens Union, it is you in this room, it is those of us who will stand with you who are going to make it possible for them to channel that outrage into real reform. As we begin the next legislative session, this has to be on our agenda. There is no reason for us to be 49th out of 50 states in voter participation. There is no reason that we essentially have no functional limits on how much money you can put into a campaign. The corrosive influence of money on government and politics can end here in New York in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to believe that change is possible before you start. If we hadn't believed that, Dick and this ragtag handful of activists that formed the Empire State Pride agenda 25 years ago hadn't believed the change that most of us thought was inconceivable was possible, it never would have happened. Let's take this opportunity to take the steps for real reform, to give New Yorkers the good government they need. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not just to keep arresting more corrupt public officials. I'm proud of the fact that our office is more engaged in this than it ever has been, and it is true we've brought more than 70 cases since in the last really 3 to 4 years. But the goal is good government, and sometimes good government is denigrated, goo-goos, or sort of referred to as people with their heads in the clouds. Good government is something that we have to believe in. We all live together. We all live together here in New York, in the most amazing city in the world, in the most remarkable state in the country, as far as I'm concerned. We have to be able to deliver good government. We know how it's done. It's not like we're trying to discover a cure for cancer. We know how it's done. It's done in other places. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our challenge. You've got the opportunity. Please seize it. Join with me, join with Citizens Union. Let's have the 21st century reform movement that New Yorkers deserve. Thank you very much.